There are times when each of us is called upon to address a group of people. There is no reason why we cannot approach this challenge with relative ease and self-confidence. But what is the purpose of speaking? Public speeches are delivered on many different occasions, but no matter what the occasion, the speaker hopes to get the audience to accept his or her point of view. Therefore, in a certain sense, all speeches are persuasive speeches. Persuading the audience to believe your information, persuading the audience to change its beliefs, persuading the audience not only to change its beliefs, but also to act on the changes. Perhaps you wish to inform your audience about capital punishment, or you may wish to get them to change their beliefs about capital punishment. Or you may not only wish them to change their beliefs, but to write letters to your government telling them what action to take. The purpose is determined by the type of audience you are speaking to, by the circumstances of the speech, and sometimes by the course of action that you recommend. But whether the purpose of a particular speech is determined by the audience, by the circumstances, or by the speaker himself, preparation of the public speech must begin with the establishment of the purpose of the speech. This purpose should be put into a sentence which is specific and concrete. A clear knowledge of the purpose in speaking is as helpful to the speaker as a roadmap is to the driver. The purpose gives direction to the speech and, to a degree, governs all subsequent efforts the speaker makes. The speaker should therefore begin preparing his speech by asking himself or herself just what action they wish their audience to take. We call this desired action, the intended audience response. The intended audience response should aid the audience, not just the speaker. We expect each speaker to be responsible for the welfare of the audience. Now, when Hitler spoke to the German people prior to and during World War II, he sought and received support for a military machine that ultimately brought death and destruction to Germany. So we believe, therefore, that he misled the German people. His intended audience response should not have been taken by the people in their own self-interest. The President of the United States has, on the other hand, suggested the exchange of atomic energy secrets and fissionable materials among the nations of the world. This is an action that people could take in their own self-interest. A person who would deliberately recommend action by the audience that was to their detriment is dishonest. He who would do so unknowingly is ignorant. Certainly, the public speaker must avoid being either. A speaker may recommend action that would be beneficial to the audience but impractical to carry out. A speaker who would select such an action will, of course, fail. To avoid such failure, the speaker should be able to answer these questions in the positive. Does the audience have the authority to take action? Does the audience have the capability to take these actions? And would it be appropriate for the audience to take these actions? In addition, the speaker should not ask for a response that he has neither the time nor the support to justify. So people will take action consistent with the ideas they accept. In order to get an audience to accept making a change or taking an action, a speaker must present an idea that will lead to the desired response. In order to clarify the relationship between the central idea and the intended audience response, let's consider something. Such things like donate money to charity or vote in the next national election. Read better books. So if you donate money to charity, you fulfill your social obligation. If you donate money to charity, you may deduct it from your income in your taxes. And charitable organisations will help your own community. Okay? Now, when we look about voting, it is a privilege to vote. It's a duty to vote. Vote to have a good government. And when we're talking about books, there are great love stories among the classics. Biographies can be instructive. Historical novels can be enjoyable reading. Now, these are examples of sort of central ideas may appear at first glance to be mere arguments in favour of taking the recommended actions. And in some cases, it's true. So let's distinguish between a central idea and an argument. A central idea is that idea which, if accepted, will bring about the action required. So in the examples we've spoken about, if the audience is the congregation in a church, the first listed idea for donating money to charity is a wise selection. If the audience are all businessmen, then the deduction of charitable donations from income taxes is a better choice. And if neither of these was appropriate, the appeal to self-interest would be the choice you need to find and to make. It is clear that one particular group would accept an idea more readily than another. So the selection of the central idea is simply a question of which idea, when it's fully developed, will influence the audience to take the action desired by the speaker. When selecting this central idea, like choosing the action, the speaker must consider the nature of his audience. He must select, it must be within the intellectual grasp of his audience. The audience must have the necessary experience to understand the idea. It can't be a challenge to the audience. So when you've selected this central idea, you then need to divide it into sub-ideas, which will in turn become the main headings for the body of your speech. The selection of the headings of a speech is an important step in the planning. So first, the headings, when taken together, should completely cover the subject. For example, a speech with the central idea that the United States government is efficient should have the following subordinate ideas, the following sort of chapters and headings, if you like. The legislative branch is efficient, the executive branch is efficient, the judicial branch is efficient. The government has 3 branches, there are no other parts. The full development of these headings treats the central idea and shows that the entire government is efficient. So having one central idea broken up into sub-ideas, properly selected and supported, it unites all the parts into your speech. And as a result of uniting all those parts, the audience believe that you've given them the complete picture. And your own experience will show that using only a few subdivisions will help you remember and understand, sometimes quite complex ideas. And if you have too many, you could get confused. They do tend to confuse you. Therefore, if you're going to have these sub-ideas or chapters, don't take any more than 5. This will depend on the length of your speech, but you can then break down those 5s into 5. So past experience indicates that 5 separate headings approach the maximum number of items that people could easily remember. Too many subheadings can actually damage how you unite your whole speech, and more than 5 sub-ideas spell huge danger to the speaker. The order in which speech materials are presented can either strengthen or weaken the effect of the speech. The speaker may find that his speech fits properly into one of the thought patterns. If not, then you should arrange the data in relation to the strength of each point. A speech may be organised around either 3 or 5 points. The more nearly your ideas approximate one of the following arrangements, the more effective your speech will be. So, the form of the outline. The speaker should begin the outline of the speech by stating to the intended audience the response in as concrete terms as is possible. And this assures the speaker that his thinking about his purpose for speaking is clear. In other words, the audience need to know what it is you are talking about. in its entirety, a sort of breakdown into 1 or 2 sentences of what the whole thing is about. He should then record the central idea. This is the next step because the selection of the entire central idea will determine the framework of the speech. After selecting this central idea, the speaker should check to see if it actually will, when developed, bring about the desired response. Okay, so you've got the overall idea, you've got your central idea, and you know what your desired response is. So dividing down that central idea into sub-ideas is the next step. Okay, and before completing the outline, it is necessary to explore each sub-idea, each chapter, read about it, talk about it, record whatever support could be found for it. And it may be at this point, it may be necessary to review that central idea and those sub-ideas to see if your reading and other research will actually enable you to improve upon those previous choice of headings. So the next problem is to select from the recorded materials the best supports available for each particular idea, decide how much is needed and arrange them in the most effective way. Now, if some headings require more specific data for support than you can find, then you're going to need to go out and do some additional research. Now that we have the ideas set down, we need to ask one more question. Which of these ideas will the audience accept on my own authority? And which of these ideas will require additional support? In general, the more radical the statement, the more likely it is that you will need to refer to a source of reference to persuade the audience to your way of thinking. Now, after the body of the speech is complete, and only then is it possible to determine an appropriate introduction and conclusion. Your speech must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, planning the introduction. Now, the purpose of the introduction is to prepare your audience to hear your speech. And in order to do this, it must grab the attention of the audience, make the audience like or respect you, both, and create an interest in the idea that you are going to present. Speak audibly. This needs not a lot of comment, since a speech unheard is practically the same as a speech unmade. Your audience need to listen from the beginning of your speech in order to understand fully the whole speech. They need to be able to hear it, to understand it. What can be said to gain attention will, of course, depend upon the speaker, the audience, and the situation. Some approaches that have been successful in the past are a startling statement. More people have been killed on our highways than have died in all the battlefields in the history of the world. Or a seemingly unbelievable but true statement. There are many Americans who actually enjoy paying their income taxes. Another one is a question or a series of questions. For instance, have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to live in Red China? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be a Chinese communist? A favourite is a familiar quotation. For all sad words of tongue or men, the saddest of these it might have been. And then there is the business-like approach. Today we are going to discuss 3 factors. First, we will consider, etc., etc. And an example, you may use a serious story, an anecdote, a joke, or a parable. But remember that one illustration is worth 1,000 words of explanation. Now, all the world likes a good story. Notice how speakers you hear get the attention of the audience. Remember, the first sentence you say will be listened to by all. You may never again have so high a percentage of listeners. Don't miss your best opportunity by wasting it on formalities or trivialities. The routine recognition of important guests can be left to a less important part of the speech. Ladies and gentlemen is the safest type of salutation and is usually used in most speech institutions. Now that you have the attention of the audience, you need to concentrate on making the audience like or respect you enough to listen. Now, with a hostile audience, it may be necessary to prolong the introduction, but for most audiences, it is sufficient that you be well prepared to speak to them, that you be interested in them, that you get the job done as quickly and as well as possible. Avoid long-winded introductions. Get to the point. Avoid apologies at all cost. The speaker who says, "I'm not very qualified to talk to you on this subject, but," ought not to be speaking to begin with. Your introduction should arouse the interest of your audience in the theme of your speech. Therefore, your startling statement, challenging statement, your series of questions, familiar quote, business-like approach, or illustration should point to the theme of your speech. Do not warm up the audience with a few unrelated jokes and then say, in effect, "Well, we had better get back to the speech." You can tell jokes, but choose ones which illustrate your point. If you think you will be nervous during the first minutes of your speech, begin with an introduction that will require movement. Put a chart on one side of the platform so that you can walk over and point to it. Set up a demonstration and practice opening with it, or plan to have a few pieces of notepaper in your hands at the beginning. A physical movement actually assists in calming you. Plan enough movement in your introduction to put you at ease. Now, it could be seen from what I've said that an introduction for a particular speech must be worked out in terms of the nature of the speech, the speaker, the audience, and the speech situation. We have offered some general suggestions that you might try out in your speeches, but I repeat these cautions. First, introductions should be as brief as possible. Second, materials in introductions should be included only if they contribute to one of the three purposes of the introduction. Third, the more original and the more timely it is, the more effective the introduction will be. And fourth, all introductions should be planned, yet flexible enough to incorporate events that may happen as late as your own introduction. And then planning the conclusion. Now, the purpose of the conclusion is to draw the whole speech together in a few words. And in order to do this, it must give the audience a sense of finality or completeness, summarize the content of the body of the speech, and or arouse the audience to action. Now, a conclusion may achieve all three of these purposes. Any one of them may be sufficient to meet the needs of an individual speech. In order to give the audience a sense of finality or completeness, the conclusion should be adequately designed to balance preparation of the introduction and the conclusion. Now, after the body of the speech is complete, and only then, is it possible to determine an appropriate introduction and conclusion, as mentioned before. It should be neither too long nor too short. Avoid the anticlimax. There is nothing worse for an audience than to think that a speaker is concluding only to find that his gained steam and is moving on to something new. A preview of your speech in your introduction will help to avoid those sort of anticlimaxes. So here are some suggestions for giving your conclusion a sense of completeness. Right? A significant quotation. Save a particularly effective sentence from one of your best sources and use it as the basis of your conclusion. You might say, "My remarks encouraging this class to adopt a child overseas under the Save the Children Federation may be most effectively concluded by quoting Constance Capron from her Reader's Digest article when she said, 'I was ashamed that my own troubles, now petty by comparison, had blinded me to the realities of life. Are we in this same fix?'" A startling statistic: only 5,500 children are now being sponsored through Save the Children Federation. Only 5,500. Think of all the thousands more you could help. Are there not more than 5,500 families who can afford to share a small amount of their income with a destitute child overseas? A fitting example, okay, let me tell you one story before I end my speech. This is the story of Stella Saradari of Ceres, Greece. Her father died fighting the communists in the mountains of Greece. Her mother is a scrub woman. Stella, her brother Constantine, and her mother live in one room. Their house fell down with a particularly hard winter and had to be rebuilt by neighbours. The conclusion to every speech ought to summarize its content. If you tell an audience in your introduction what to expect in the speech by saying, "I am going to discuss 3 things with you," if you point out to the audience in the body of the speech when you are discussing each of these by saying, "Now first we will discuss," and if in your conclusion you say, "Now I have told you 3 things about," your audience cannot help but get a clear picture of the messages. Now, if this sounds too elementary to you, remember that you are already highly familiar with the content of your speech and have gone over the materials several times. Your audience, on the contrary, has not had this opportunity. If you give an audience 3 reviews of your main structure, once in the introduction, once in the body, and once in the conclusion, you need have no fears of being misunderstood. The suggested conclusion will, to a very great extent, summarize your content. But your central idea will be even clearer if you also review for your audience the main parts of your speech. If you are not organized, you cannot make such a summary.